My name is Marin Solas, 29 years old. Most days I lived like a rumor of myself. Warehouse shift, groceries, studio apartment, lights off, repeat. After Dorian, the ex-boyfriend who drained our joint account, and Ivy, my once best friend, vanished together. I built a life with no doors, no parties, no dates, no favors. People can't hurt you if they can't find the edges of you. On a Tuesday, the color of old receipts, I pushed a cart across the grocery lot. 2 rows over, an older woman's canvas bag split. Oranges rolled, bright as little suns, and amber pill bottles clattered against the asphalt. I kept walking, muscle memory. Other people's emergencies weren't my job anymore. But she didn't crouch to gather anything. She just stood there, shoulders small inside a wool coat, eyes fixed on the mess like it was a forecast she'd been expecting. I stopped before my brain approved it. Need some help? I heard myself say. Her face lifted, hopeful and surprised, in the same second. Oh, bless you, she said, breathless. These hands don't bend like they used to. We chased oranges under bumpers. I stacked pill bottles back in their tray. She narrated with the polite urgency of someone who hasn't had enough listening lately. Her name, Mrs. Kowalski. Her late husband's roses, a granddaughter in California who is so busy, dear, and a medical thing next week she insisted was nothing serious, just a tune-up. I nodded, ready to disappear. Then she did it. You seem like a decent young woman. Come to dinner Friday? I make too much food and my table hates being empty. Everything in me shouted no. This is exactly how feelings get in, through polite invitations and warm kitchens. But her smile was a porch light. Against better judgment, I said, sure, that sounds nice. Friday, I almost didn't go. I idled in my car outside her little house, white siding, hand-painted wind chimes, a ceramic frog guarding the steps, keys in the ignition, ready to bail. I'd promised. Promises are a kind of border, too. Inside was a time capsule, doilies, sun-faded photos, a clock that ticked like a heartbeat. Something rich simmered on the stove. There you are, she beamed, ushering me in with hands that had stopped bending but never stopped welcoming. You're early. Good. There's someone I want you to... Grandma, do you need... The voice came from the kitchen. He came with it. Tall, paint-stained fingers, dark curls trying to fall into eyes the color of warmed honey. A smear of flour grazed his cheek. He held a wooden spoon like an instrument. This is my grandson Zane, Mrs. Kowalski said, delighted with her theatrics. Flew in from California yesterday. Zane wiped his hand on a towel and offered it. So you're the grocery lot hero my grandma won't stop talking about. Just being decent, I said, and my voice sounded like it belonged to someone less breakable. That's rarer than you think, he said, and he meant it. Dinner should have been awkward. It wasn't. Zane asked real questions and waited for the answers. He taught art, elementary school mostly, and spoke about kids' drawings like they were weather maps for their hearts. He listened when I mentioned engines. His eyes lit when I described sanding a gas tank to bare metal. Every time I tried to make myself smaller, he made space around the shrinking and didn't step into it. Mrs. K watched us with the satisfied mischief of a match struck on the first try. Between courses, she mentioned her little procedure again. Zane's staying a while, she said, just until I'm back to scaring the birds out of my garden. I'll be here a few weeks, Zane said. Maybe longer, if she lets me. She'll let you, I said, and surprised myself by sounding sure. After pie, the kind that tastes like someone remembered your middle name, Zane walked me to my car. The night was crisp enough to turn breath into clouds. The neighborhood smelled like wood smoke and the lives of people who weren't afraid of their own rooms. Thank you for coming, he said. You saved me from talking to Grandma about her neighbor's gout for the third time. I'm useful like that, I said. It came out softer than I intended. He studied me the way artists do. Kindly, thoroughly, as if their eyes are measuring light, not worth. You fix things? He asked, chin tipping at my hands. I used to, I said. Motorcycles, with my dad. Used to, he repeated. Not a challenge. A map. Life got pragmatic, I said, which was polite for someone convinced me my joy was childish, and I believed him. Well, he said, a smile tugging, Grandma's garage is a little museum of things waiting to be useful again. If you ever feel like saying yes to rust and dust. We exchanged numbers in case Grandma needs anything urgent, which was adorable. I drove home through a town that looked briefly like a painting. Warm windows, frost on roofs, a dog trotting with purpose. In my studio, the dark tried to settle around me like a familiar blanket. I turned on a lamp instead. For a week, I didn't think about Zane, which is to say, I thought about him constantly and called it not thinking. I brought Mrs. K soup the day before her procedure, and she made me sit while she told me the story of meeting her husband at a dance. 3 months later, we married, she said. I do not recommend this as a general rule, but sometimes you recognize the sound of your own future. On the morning of her hospital appointment, I texted, "Good luck," and Zane replied with a photo of Mrs. K giving a thumbs up from a wheelchair. His caption, "She says she'll be home by lunch to supervise soup." The laughing emoji didn't feel like armor. It felt like air. After work, I checked on them. Mrs. K was already on the couch, bossing a blanket. Zane floated between kitchen and living room, like a gentle metronome. We ate something miraculous and unpretentious. He asked what I did for fun, and I almost said sleep before remembering that isn't fun. It's hiding. Used to restore bikes, I said. Haven't touched one in 2 years. Why'd you stop? Zane asked. Someone convinced me that passion was an expense, I said. That a woman with grease under her nails is unserious. Zane's grin tilted. Someone sounds boring. Someone was persuasive, I said, and the room didn't tilt. It stayed steady under my feet. Mrs. K clapped once, startling the lamp. Enough about ghosts, she declared. Marin, will you open the garage and hand me my lawn chair? I intend to supervise fresh air. I lifted the rolling door and let late light spill across concrete. Dust motes danced like they'd been waiting for music. Along the back wall, a tarp, big enough to be a secret. What's this? Zane asked, already reaching. Just, I started. He tugged. The tarp slid off with a shiver, and there it was, 1969. Triumph Bonneville, chrome dulled, paint sleeping, dignity intact. My throat closed around 1,000 Saturdays in my dad's driveway. He used to say every machine has a memory for love if you touch it right. Zane didn't whistle or crack a joke. He just stepped closer like you do at a museum when you're in front of something that remembers you. She's beautiful, he said, reverent. How could you abandon her? Someone convinced me it was a waste of time, I said again. Someone, he said, kinder this time, was very wrong. Mrs. K settled in her chair with the posture of a queen and the glee of a child. Well, she said, are we going to let that poor girl sit there under all this dust, or are we going to wake her up? I could feel the old muscle memory in my hands, the reach for a socket wrench, the way a rag finds the curve of a tank, like a palm to a cheek. Fear is a terrible mechanic. It strips every bolt. But in the garage light, fear looks small. I don't even know where my tools are, I said. In the red toolbox, Mrs. K and Zane said at the same time. We all laughed then, and something in my chest laughed with us. I cleaned a circle in the dust with my sleeve. The Triumph's badge blinked back at me, stubborn and sweet. The last time I'd looked this closely at anything I loved, it had cost me everything. But standing there, with a woman who refused to be fragile and a man who could see without taking, I felt the old engine of myself turn over. Okay, I said, the words steadier than I felt. Maybe we start with the basics. Zane handed me a wrench like a solemn vow. Outside, the evening went the color of forgiveness. Inside, metal remembered my name. Sometimes a life doesn't explode, it clicks. A small yes. Then another. Then a road you couldn't see 10 minutes ago is the only one that makes sense. I didn't know it yet, but this was the first mile marker. The one you pass and only later realize was the moment you turn toward home. The first week after we uncovered the Triumph, my phone became a metronome of small invitations. Zane. Grandma's napping. Coffee run? I promise the barista knows how to spell Marin without turning it into Marine. Me. Prove it. Zane. Hardware store? Apparently hose clamps don't breed in captivity. Me. On my way. Zane. Garage at 4? Sunlight is optimal for admitting you missed socket wrenches. Me. Don't get cocky. I kept saying yes. Not because I trusted yes, but because the no I'd been living inside had started to feel like a closet with the light burnt out. We started with the obvious. Air, spark, fuel. Zane rolled the bike into the driveway like a ceremony. Mrs. Kowalski installed herself in a lawn chair with a blanket over her knees and the stateliness of a queen who tolerates being adored. Treat her like a lady, she advised, eyeing the Triumph. Mind you, I never liked that phrase. Ladies can also be loud and fast. Duly noted, Zane said solemnly, handing me a rag like it was a rosary. The tank wore its dust like a veil. I wiped a clean crescent, and color blinked through, deep, stubborn blue. My dad and I had spent a whole weekend arguing about that paint. He'd wanted classic silver, I'd wanted the sky. We compromised by pretending the argument was about primer. Carbs first? Zane asked. You read my mind, I said. It surprised me how easily my hands remembered order. Loosen the clamps, angle the body just so, respect the brittle of old rubber. Grief is mechanical too. You move in the old sequence even when you don't want to. I should warn you, Zane said, crouching beside me. I'm mechanically illiterate. That's okay, I said, deadpan. You can hand me tools and look pretty. He pressed a hand to his heart. Objectified, at last. Mrs. K snorted into her thermos. We laid tools out military neat. Sun pooled across the concrete. Somewhere a lawnmower coughed awake. Somewhere else, wind chimes tried to be brave. Mrs. K narrated neighborhood lore and occasionally broke into unsolicited advice about young love, which we both pretended not to hear. What's that? Zane pointed. Primary drive, I said. I felt the old lecture find me easily. Transfers power from the crankshaft to the transmission. If you treat a machine like it's stupid, it will prove you right. Respect it, and it respects you back. Zane nodded the way you nod when your bones agree. That's teaching too, he said. Kids are just engines with softer parts. Every time I reached for a wrench, he was already holding it out. Every time I tried to hide in commentary, he found the one question that asked me to be specific instead of small. He sketched between steps, charcoal smudges on his fingers, small observances on scrap paper, the curve of the tank, the half smile I didn't realize I made when a bolt cooperated, the line of my wrist bracing a stubborn screw. You're cataloging me, I accused. I'm listening with my eyes, he said. We drained the old fuel, brown as regret, and poured new in. He held the funnel, careful, tongue caught between his teeth in concentration. The intimacy of ordinary tasks startled me. Two people sharing the gravitational pull of purpose, shoulders almost touching, silence comfortable enough to put its feet on the furniture. Between errands, he learned my backstory the way you learn a route, landmarks only. Dorian, the account, the best friend who became a stranger with my toothbrush. I didn't give him adjectives. He didn't ask for them. He offered his own outlines. An ex-fiancé who called his paintings cute little doodles. Parents who loved him, but loved practicality more. A classroom where third graders made galaxies out of tempera paint and grief they didn't have words for yet. Why did you stop? He asked once, soft as a socket setting. Because someone told me joy was indulgent, I said. And I wanted to be good more than I wanted to be alive. We replaced the plugs, checked the leads, bled the brakes, argued amiably about whether the old chain was salvageable. It wasn't. I mourned it anyway. When I hesitated on a decision, he didn't fill the pause with his answer. He waited for mine. On Saturday, he showed up with lemonade and a gilt bouquet of new shop rags. Didn't want to ruin your sleeve again, he said. You're learning, I said. I'm being trained, he corrected, like a golden retriever with opposable thumbs. I laughed then, an unguarded sound I hadn't made in 2 years. It startled me so much I almost dropped the ratchet. Zane looked at me, like I'd found a switch I'd been insisting didn't exist. We got spark late that afternoon. Clean, eager spark. Fuel followed, then the ceremony. Choke set, ignition on, a gentle kick like you're waking a friend. The engine coughed, decided to be dramatic, and died. She's shy, Zane said. Grandma, give her a pep talk. Mrs. K lifted her thermos in salute. We believe in you, sweetheart, she intoned. But if you embarrass me in front of the neighbors again, I will call the priest. Second kick, a stutter. Third kick, ignition. The engine bloomed into sound, rough and lovely, like a throat clearing to sing. The driveway trembled. The smell, gas, metal, a whiff of past, rose up and knocked on a door I hadn't opened since my father's funeral. I let it run, hand on the throttle like you hold a pulse. Zane whooped. Mrs. K wiped her eyes. I didn't move. I listened until the idol leveled, until the bike remembered how to be itself without apology. Later, when the sun slid off the roof and the evening asked to be invited, we stayed in the garage to adjust timing. Zane held a flashlight while I leaned in, the light casting sharp silhouettes on the wall. Our heads bowed over the engine like a prayer I could finally say without choking. "What?" he asked after a while. "You're staring," I said, not looking up. "You're really good at this," he said simply. "Not just competent, passionate. It's attractive." The wrench paused in my hand. The word hung there, patient as heat. I looked up. He didn't look away. The beam of the flashlight flared slightly with his breathing. "Zane," I said, a warning with no threat in it. "Yes," he said, as if I'd asked something. So I did the thing I'd been not doing since dinner that first night. I reached and kissed him. It wasn't cinematic. There was an awkward clink of metal, and the flashlight panicked, rolled under the bike, and spun its beam into frantic constellations on the ceiling. But his mouth was warm and certain, and something inside me that had been crouching for years stood up. "I've been wanting to do that for weeks," I admitted, breathless. "Only weeks?" he teased, smiling into my apology. "I've been thinking about it since you bullied that carburetor into confessing." We laughed, and the garage felt like a church where the hymns were all the sounds of work. Clink, hum, sigh, yes. After that, the rhythm found us. Days divided cleanly. Warehouse shift, texts about hose clamps, afternoons in the driveway, dinner at Mrs. K's table where she insisted on seconds, and muttered approving things to her roses. Between tasks, Zane drew, quick lines of me in a ponytail, brow furrowed, happiness unguarded. One day he handed me a sketch. Me, bent over the Bonnie, a small smile at the corner of my mouth I didn't recognize. "You look like yourself here," he said. "I didn't know I had a here," I said. "You do now," he said. When Mrs. K's follow-up appointment came back clean, relief felt like new oil gliding where it should. Zane lingered anyway, inventing reasons. The yard needed edging. Mr. Ashby down the block needed help lifting a dresser. Grandma's neighbor's cat required a name. We settled on Pistachio. The cat disagreed. On a breezy Tuesday, Zane parked 2 mugs of coffee on the workbench and leaned his hip against it like a punctuation mark. "My summer break ends in 2 weeks," he said lightly, but his fingers told the truth, whirring the sleeve of his shirt. "I have to go back to California." "Right," I said. The word scraped. He exhaled, turned fully toward me. "Unless you want to say yes to something unreasonable." My heart tripped. Define unreasonable. "Come with me," he said, like he was asking me to move a box, not a life. "We'll figure the how. We always do. Just come." Every rational thought lined up to say no. The life I'd rebuilt, spare, safe, numb, had rules. You don't cross state lines for a man you've known 6 weeks and a motorcycle you just resurrected. You don't take your heart off airplane mode without asking a committee of ghosts for permission. But behind him, the triumph caught the light and threw it back at me. My dad's voice, not the critical one, the Sunday one, said, "Every part has a purpose. If you respect the machine, it will respect you back." Maybe that was true of lives too. "Yes," I heard myself say. My voice was steady. My hands weren't. Zane's grin broke open like weather turning. "Really?" "On 2 conditions," I said, recovering the part of myself that negotiates with fate. "The bike comes with us, and we ride it there." He laughed, the sound bright and ridiculous and exactly what I wanted. "Deal," he said. And then he kissed me, like the next chapter had already been written and we were just catching up. That night, I lay in my apartment and listened to my upstairs neighbor drag furniture across the floor of his life. I stared at the ceiling and mapped a route in my head, miles turning to days, days turning to courage. Fear tried to bargain. "You'll fail. You'll be small again." Joy countered with an offer I couldn't refuse. "You'll be you again." I set an alarm for an hour I used to hate. When it went off, I didn't hit snooze. I got up, opened a browser tab, and typed a resignation letter that felt less like leaving and more like arriving. Then I texted Zane a photo of the Bonnie's polished tank, my face faint in the reflection, smiling like I'd caught myself doing something dangerous and right. "Me, she says yes too." He replied with a map pin and chemet and a heart, which I didn't trust but believed anyway. Sometimes it's not the engine that needs a tune. It's the courage. The day we left the Midwest, the sky looked scrubbed clean, like the world had been washed for a new beginning. Mrs. Kowalski stood at the curb in her robe and slippers, pretending not to cry. "In my day, girls didn't run off with strange men," she said, trying for stern and missing by a mile. Zane kissed her cheek. In your day, you married Grandpa after 3 months. That was different, she huffed. We were properly chaperoned. Then she hugged me so tight I could feel every word she didn't say. You take care of each other, she whispered. And don't forget to stop for pie somewhere good. The Bonnie idled between us, newly reborn, chrome flashing. We'd fitted her with soft saddlebags, packed light, 1 duffel each, 1 box of tools, a handful of nerves, and a road full of maybes. Zane climbed on behind me, arms around my waist. You sure about this? No, I said, twisting the throttle. That's why it's worth doing. The first mile was a blur of cold air and adrenaline. By the 5th, my fear had folded itself into rhythm. Engine, wind, heartbeat. We traced highways that stitched through cornfields and small towns. At every gas stop, Zane stretched, grinning like a man reborn. I can't believe you actually know how to keep this thing alive, he said. Don't insult her, I warned. She's sensitive. He laughed, then shouted over the wind, You're incredible, Marin. I didn't answer. I just let the road swallow the words, because hearing them felt too good to trust yet. Nights were motels and diners, and tiny moments that felt like forever. In Iowa, we split a slice of peach pie that tasted like forgiveness. In Colorado, the bike overheated halfway up a pass, and we sat on the shoulder, watching clouds crawl through the canyon until the engine cooled. In Nevada, he asked about Dorian, the ex who'd made me feel like every dream had an invoice attached. He said motorcycles were a hobby for people avoiding real life, I told him. Zane shook his head. You know what's worse than that? What? People who stop dreaming because someone else charges them interest. That night, in a desert motel that smelled like sunburn and coffee, he told me about Clara, his ex-fiancée. How she'd called his art cute and suggested he try something stable. She wanted me to be smaller, he said quietly, and I let her for a while. We both did, I said. Let the wrong people edit us. He looked at me, serious. Then let's promise not to do that again. Ever. We sealed it with a kiss that felt like a contract signed in starlight. By the time we hit California, the triumph felt like an extension of my body. Zane's tiny apartment was in a sun-bleached neighborhood where taco trucks outnumbered mailboxes. The place smelled like paint and eucalyptus. This is home? I asked, stepping over canvases leaning against the wall. For now, he said, until we figure out something bigger, better. The landlord eyed us suspiciously. Lease says 1 occupant, he said. I'll pay extra, I offered. You got a job? I'll find one. He frowned, then shrugged. Don't ruin the plumbing. Artists always ruin the plumbing. I found work faster than I expected. The local motorcycle restoration shop, Rico's Custom, needed another mechanic. Rico himself was built like an oil drum and spoke in monosyllables. He looked at the Bonnie, still bug-splattered from the trip, and grunted. You keep this running cross-country? Every mile. He nodded once. Start Monday. You break what you fix what you break. It was the best compliment anyone had ever given me. Our days found their shape. Zane left early for the elementary school where he taught art. I left for Rico's, the smell of metal and gasoline already soothing. I learned to restore vintage Harleys, Nortons, Indians, machines with history baked into every bolt. Rico's rule was simple. We don't just fix bikes, we resurrect stories. In the evenings, I came home covered in grease. Zane came home covered in paint. We'd shower, cook dinner side by side, talk about everything from student projects to the next restoration I wanted to try. Our lives felt like a rhythm we hadn't realized we knew. The garage beneath the apartment became our shared sanctuary. He painted, I rebuilt. The hum of his brush strokes matched the click of my ratchet. Sometimes he'd pause and sketch me mid-task, grinning when I caught him. You look peaceful when you work, he'd say. I'm focused. Same thing. One Friday night, we sat on the floor with takeout containers and a half bottle of cheap wine. Zane watched me across the flickering candle we'd improvised from a jelly jar. I've been thinking, he said. That sounds dangerous. I don't want to just date you, I laughed. That's the wine talking. No, he said, suddenly serious. This is me talking. He pulled a small box from his pocket, the kind jewelers use when they're confident. Inside was a ring, simple, vintage, a sapphire circled by tiny diamonds that looked like flecks of sky. My breath caught. Zane! Before you panic, he said quickly. I know it's fast, but every day with you feels like the life I thought I wasn't going to get. You make the world look possible again. Will you marry me? The yes tumbled out before logic could veto it. Yes, I said, laughing through tears. Yes, you ridiculous man. He slid the ring on my finger and kissed me, slow and sure, like he was promising to keep pace with me forever. Mrs. Kowalski reacted exactly how I expected. In my rose garden, she declared over the phone. You'll get married in my rose garden, or I'll haunt you when I'm gone. 3 months later, we did exactly that. Her backyard was a riot of color, roses climbing trellises, sunlight dripping through branches like confetti. Zane wore a suit that didn't quite fit. I wore a dress that did. My mom flew in early to help decorate, muttering something about miracles when she saw me smiling again. Rico closed the shop for a week to attend, standing proudly beside my mother at the ceremony. You got good hands, he whispered before I walked down the aisle. Don't forget they're meant for building, not clenching. Zane's grandmother cried during our vows. My mother cried after. The roses smelled like new beginnings. At the reception, my brother pulled me aside. You look like yourself again, he said. Maybe I finally am, I said. That night, under fairy lights and laughter, I caught Mrs. Kowalski watching us from her chair, a contented smile softening her face. She raised her glass to me and mouthed one word, yes. The music swelled, Zane's hand found mine, and for the first time in years, the future didn't look like something to survive. It looked like something to drive straight into, wide open, full throttle, no map required. Marriage didn't hit like thunder. It came in soft, steady pulses. The smell of paint thinner and coffee, the hum of engines downstairs, the clink of plates in a kitchen too small for two dreamers and their ideas. Zane and I used to joke that we were the least compatible people in California. He thrived in chaos. Canvases stacked like leaning towers, brushes soaking in mason jars, smudges of color on every surface. I lived by order, tools aligned by size, projects labeled by stage, every bolt in its proper tray. Our first argument was about space, specifically his art supplies colonizing the garage. You realize the Triumph is now surrounded by acrylics, I said one morning, surveying the battlefield. They're good company, he said, stretching. Both smell like solvents and genius. Genius doesn't need to block access to my carburetors. He grinned, walking over, leaving little barefoot paint prints on the concrete. What if I'm just marking territory? You're going to die with a wrench in your hand, I warned. If you promise to eulogize me in 4/4 time, he said. We learned quickly that love wasn't cinematic, it was practical. It was buying extra rags because one of you used them as impromptu brush wipes. It was remembering to shut off the compressor before midnight so the neighbors didn't hate you. It was meeting in the middle, grease-stained and paint-smeared, and still wanting to touch each other's faces. Work at Rico's Custom settled into rhythm. Rico was half mentor, half philosopher. He spoke in short, strange parables like, engines are just hearts that learn to stay. When he found me hunched over a '58 Indian chief, he'd grunt, patience makes better machines, and better people. I was earning trust, then bigger projects. Customers started asking for me by name. Rico noticed. You're good with machines because you listen, he said one afternoon, polishing a tank beside me. Not just to noise, to silence. Most folks panic at silence. I smiled. Used to. The shop became a second home. The smell of oil, the radio stuck between classic rock and static, Rico's soft whistle, all of it steadied me. Zane's career was blooming too. His students adored him. He started after-school art clubs, bringing snacks out of his own pocket. At night, he came home with paint under his nails and stories that made me forget the exhaustion in my bones. Today, a first grader told me her art makes her feel brave, he said once, head in my lap. I told her mine does too. We'd collapse into bed smelling like opposite worlds, steel and turpentine, and somehow fit perfectly. Money came up 6 months in. Not a fight, exactly. A tension. I was earning less at the shop, and Zane's teaching salary kept us afloat. It clawed at my pride in quiet, ugly ways. I'll pick up extra shifts, I said, or take freelance builds. He frowned. Why? We're fine. I don't want you carrying everything. He set down his brush. I'm not carrying. We're walking. I hated how kind that sounded. I don't want to owe anyone. Zane studied me. You don't owe me, Marin. You choose me every day. There's a difference. He didn't push after that, but later that week, he left an envelope on my workbench. A sketch he'd made of me mid-restoration, hair tied back, focus carved into my face. On the bottom, he'd written, "Partnership balance sheet." It hung over the workbench from then on. Rico started talking retirement the following spring. "You ever think about owning this place?" he asked. I almost dropped the wrench. "Owning? You got the hands for it, and the head." "I don't have the money," he smirked. "Who said anything about buying? You earn it. 5 years. You keep the standards. I'll hand over the keys." I stood there, stunned. "You'd trust me with your legacy?" "You rebuilt my best customer's bike in 2 weeks, he said. "And you rebuilt yourself. Same skill, different tools." That night, I told Zane. He grinned so wide I thought his face might split. "You're going to run your own shop," he said. "You realize that, right?" "I realize I'm terrified," I said. "Good. Means it matters." We found a bigger apartment not long after. 2 bedrooms, 1 garage. He turned the spare into an art studio. I claimed the garage for restoration projects. The walls between our passions were thin enough for cross-pollination. When he painted, I could hear his brush tapping like rain. When I tuned engines, he said the sound reminded him of a heartbeat. We ate late, slept late, dreamed loud. One night, while cleaning up, he said, "You know what I love about us? That we never agree on radio stations?" "That too," he laughed. "But mostly that our lives fit together like parallel lines, close enough to move in sync, but never suffocating." I smiled. "That's geometry, not romance." He leaned over, kissed the corner of my mouth. In my language, it's both. 6 months later, everything shifted again. Zane came home waving a letter. "The school offered me a full-time position," he said, breathless. "Head of the art department." I dropped my wrench. "Zane, that's incredible." He nodded, but his eyes flickered with doubt. "What?" I asked. He hesitated. "It's permanent. Real. I should be ecstatic, but what if this changes us?" "It already has," I said. "In a good way. We're building something real, remember?" He smiled then, small but genuine. "I have a surprise for you, too," I said, pulling open my desk drawer. "Rico offered me the shop. 5 years from now, it'll be mine." Zane blinked. Marin, that's huge." "I know." "So we're both leveling up." "Looks like it." He grinned, pulling me into a hug. "Then I guess it's time for a toast." He poured wine into 2 mismatched mugs. "To us," he said. "To growth," I said. "To terrifyingly beautiful decisions," he added. We clinked glasses and laughed because it was true. 3 months later, Zane proposed again, this time to the idea of a family. We were painting the bedroom a shade called Sunrise Mist, and he said it casually, like asking for salt. "What do you think about kids?" My brush froze mid-stroke. "Kids?" "Not now," he said quickly. "Someday." I exhaled. "Someday's fine. Someday sounds like a road trip without a map." He smiled. "Then we'll stop for pie." That night, lying in bed, the hum of the city outside, I realized how far I'd come from the woman who once measured safety in solitude. Now I measured it in laughter across the hall, in oil stains and paint splatters, in the quiet certainty that I'd built a life out of pieces everyone else thought were scrap. Zane murmured, half asleep, "Still glad you said yes?" I looked at him, at the hands that smelled of turpentine, the face that looked like home, and said the only truth that fit, every day. The future was still unwritten, but for the first time I wasn't afraid of the blank page. Pregnancy wasn't part of the plan. It was part of life's sense of timing. Zane found me in the bathroom, frozen in front of a plastic stick that held our entire future in 2 faint pink lines. My first thought was terror. His first was joy. "You're crying," he said. "I'm malfunctioning," I whispered. He laughed, wrapping his arms around me from behind. "Guess we're upgrading the family model." We named the bump Owen before we even knew it was a boy. It just fit, soft and strong at once. The months blurred. Morning sickness, late-night cravings, me swearing I'd never eat saltines again. Zane painting baby animals on the nursery walls, each one a masterpiece of whimsy. Elephants with paintbrush trunks, foxes with motorcycle helmets. "Art meets engines," he said proudly. "Our kid's first gallery." Mrs. Kowalski flew out for the final month, determined to supervise. She brought casseroles, unsolicited advice, and a level of authority that terrified Zane. In my day, fathers weren't allowed in the delivery room, she announced, which was ridiculous. Men should see what they cause. Owen arrived on a Tuesday, 5 years to the day since I'd said yes in that parking lot. He had Zane's eyes, my stubborn chin, and the loudest cry I'd ever heard. When the nurse placed him in my arms, something broke open inside me, a soft, seismic kind of love that left no room for fear. He's perfect, I whispered. Like his mom, Zane said. We didn't sleep for 3 days. Mrs. Kowalski took over like a field general, teaching me the difference between hungry crying and existential crisis crying. You're a natural, she said one night as I rocked Owen in the dim light. Machines, babies, it's all mechanics and instinct. I used to think I wasn't built for this, I admitted. You were built to rebuild, she said. Doesn't matter the engine. A year later, Rico officially retired. He handed me the shop keys with a handshake that meant inheritance. Keep the name, he said, and the heart. I changed the sign to Rico and Daughters, half as a joke, half as a promise. Zane cried when he saw it. Business boomed. Word spread about the woman mechanic who could make vintage bikes purr like new. Zane's art career was rising too. His students adored him, and the local gallery began showing his work. Our lives became a duet of creation, his on canvas, mine in chrome. When Grace was born 2 years later, she came out silent. For 5 terrifying seconds, the room froze. Then she took a breath so loud it felt like defiance. She's dramatic, Zane said, eyes wet. Definitely your child. Grace had my dark hair and his creative curiosity. She finger-painted before she could talk, climbed before she could walk, and smiled like she knew something the rest of us didn't. Mrs. Kowalski cried when we told her we named Grace after her. You didn't have to do that, she said. Yes, we did, Zane said softly. You started this story. Years folded, our house filled with the clutter of joy. Crayons, wrench sets, half-finished canvases, Lego engines. Zane became head of the district's art program, introducing free classes for low-income schools. Every kid deserves color, he said. The shop became a community hub, filled with old bikers telling stories and teenagers learning how to change oil instead of scrolling their phones. I added a showroom, taught workshops on weekends, hired apprentices who needed second chances. I loved it, but more than that, I loved what it symbolized. Proof that repair, of engines, of people, was possible. Then the call came. Mrs. Kowalski had suffered a stroke. Zane booked the first flight home. I can handle the kids, I told him. He nodded, but guilt filled the silence between us. For 2 weeks, we lived in updates. Doctor's calls, video chats, whispered prayers. She couldn't talk clearly, but when she squeezed Zane's hand on screen, her eyes still sparkled with mischief. The recovery will be long, Zane said after one of those calls. She's scared. The house is falling apart. Finances a mess. How long will you stay? He hesitated. I don't know. Maybe. What if we just move back? The thought should have terrified me. California was our home, our business, our friends. But I looked at Owen playing with a wrench on the living room floor, at Grace drawing a motorcycle with wings, and I knew he was right. Let's go home, I said. Selling the shop hurt, but Rico, now half retired in spirit, not heart, helped me find a buyer. You're doing the right thing, he said. Family first. But if you ever come back west, your bench is waiting. The day we left, I closed the garage door one last time, kissed my fingers, and pressed them to the Triumph's tank. She's made it this far, I whispered. So will we. Owen held my hand at the airport. Will Great-Grandma remember us? Every minute she can, I said. We landed in the Midwest to snow that looked like silence. Mrs. Kowalski was waiting in her wheelchair, thinner but radiant. You came home, she said. All of us, Owen said proudly, hugging her careful as glass. We found an old farmhouse near her place, a fixer-upper with peeling paint, uneven floors, and a garage big enough for dreams. The realtor warned us it needed work. We like projects, I said. Starting over was harder than either of us admitted. Zane found work as an art coordinator at the local district. I built a new shop from scratch. 1 workbench, 1 sign, 1 reputation. It was exhausting. It was glorious. By spring, word spread. Collectors came from 3 states away. The local paper ran a headline, Woman revives rusted dreams. Zane framed it. The kids thrived. Owen joined robotics club and spent afternoons in my shop, hands steady, questions endless. Grace painted murals at school so vivid they made teachers cry. Mrs. Kowalski, meanwhile, reclaimed her crown. She supervised from her porch, scolding anyone who didn't use coasters. I never thought I'd live to see great-grandkids, she said one evening, but now I've seen love bloom twice. 3 years later, winter hit hard. Mrs. K caught pneumonia and landed in the hospital again. When she came home, weaker but smiling, she told me, "You've done what I always prayed for." What's that? Built something that outlives you. She lived long enough to see Owen win a robotics competition and Grace's first gallery show. The night before she passed, she whispered to Zane, "Thank you for saying yes all those years ago." Her funeral overflowed. Neighbors, students, old bikers, strangers who'd once been helped by her kindness, all came to pay respects. During the eulogy, Owen spoke first. She taught us that helping someone pick up groceries can change your whole life. Grace followed. She said families aren't just who you're born to, they're who you choose to love. In her will, she left us her house, the same one where I'd first knocked on her door with a pot of soup years ago. Inside was a note written in her delicate script. "Thank you for proving kindness isn't extinct, for showing me love stories don't have an age limit, and for teaching me that saying yes is how we stay alive." We turned the house into something new. A workshop for me, a gallery for Zane, a studio for Grace, and a tinkering corner for Owen's inventions. We named it the Yes House. Every week, kids come to paint, teens to build, old bikers to swap stories. It smells like oil and acrylic, laughter and legacy. Sometimes, when I lock up at night, I think about that grocery parking lot, the oranges rolling away, the tired woman staring at her spilled life. If I'd kept walking, I'd still be the version of me who mistook solitude for safety. But I stopped. I said yes. That one word carried me through everything that followed: love, marriage, children, loss, creation. It's the hum beneath every engine I touch and the heartbeat behind every mom my kids call across the yard. The Triumph still sits in the corner of the shop, polished and proud. On the gas tank, taped beneath the clear coat, are 3 words Mrs. Kowalski scribbled before she died. Keep saying yes. I do, every day, because yes isn't just a word, it's a way forward.